Cassandra Rivera had spent 8 years invisible. 8 years in a black and white maid's uniform, moving through the halls of Rafael Castellano's mansion like a ghost who had learned to make no sound, cast no shadow, ask for nothing. Her body was a map of violence written in languages no one wanted to read. Purple bruises that faded to yellow. Scars on her ribs that ached when the fog rolled in from the bay. Her ex-boyfriend Marcus Webb had fists that found her in the dark while corrupt cops ignored every call, every photograph of her broken skin, every desperate plea for help that died in the mouths of men who had been paid to forget she existed. She had $17 in her pocket. $17 was supposed to last until Friday. It was Tuesday. But on one cold November night, when the highway swallowed her car and the rain came down like a curse, everything changed. The underground poker room hung thick with cigar smoke and the weight of secrets. Green felt tables stretched across the floor like islands in a sea of darkness. Armed guards stood at every entrance, their suits perfectly tailored, their eyes scanning constantly for threats that never came because everyone in this room answered to Rafael Castellano. Stacks of cash sat piled on the tables like the spoils of a war most people didn't know was being fought. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Millions, perhaps. Money that had been earned through violence and held through loyalty. Rafael sat at the head table, his massive frame draped in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars. His hands were scarred, powerful, capable of crushing bone or signing documents that changed lives. But it was his eyes that held everyone's attention. Dark sunglasses covered them, had covered them for 7 years since the explosion that took his sight and gave him something else. Something that let him see people in ways sight never could. Tonight, his hand rested on the shoulder of a woman in a simple black dress. Cassandra. The invisible maid. The woman no one had ever seen him touch before. The smoke hung motionless in the air. Marco and Franco exchanged a glance that lasted 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, their entire understanding of the world shifted. In 15 years of working for Rafael Castellano, they had never seen him sit beside anyone like this. Never seen his hand remain on another person's shoulder for more than a moment. Never seen his body language suggest anything other than absolute solitude. The doors at the far end of the room opened without warning. They dragged Marcus Webb through them like a sack of broken things. His face was white, absolutely white, drained of blood and hope and any remaining belief that he would leave this room with his life intact. His mouth opened and closed without sound at first, then the screaming started, a high, thin sound like metal tearing through concrete. His arms thrashed against the hands holding him. His legs buckled and dangled above the floor. Rafael did not move. His fingers remained exactly where they were, resting on Cassandra's shoulder with a gentleness that contradicted everything happening 15 feet away. She could feel his hand. Warm. Steady. Completely unmoved by the chaos before them. "I trust only one person in this world," Rafael said. His voice was quiet, measured, like a man reading from a script he had written centuries ago. "You made the mistake of hurting her." He gestured once. A single finger lifted and fell. The Moretti family enforcers stepped forward from the shadows where they had been waiting. 3 men in black suits. Expressionless. Professional. Marcus Webb's screaming rose several octaves, then cut off abruptly as they grabbed his arms and legs. He began to sob, the kind of deep, gasping sobs that came from a place that had already accepted death. "Where are you taking him?" someone whispered from the back of the room. No one answered. In this room, some questions erased the people who asked them. Cassandra's hand trembled on the table in front of her. Her fingers were calloused from 8 years of holding mops, scrubbing floors on her hands and knees, cleaning up other people's messes while her own life fell apart in silence. Her nails were broken. Her palms were rough. And yet, sitting here at this table surrounded by men who had murdered for less than what they spent on breakfast, she was not afraid. Not of the men dragging Marcus Webb away screaming into a fate worse than any quick death. Not of the guns in shoulder holsters all around her. Not of Rafael Castellano himself, the blind man whose hand on her shoulder held more power than entire armies. Marcus Webb's voice faded as the doors closed behind them, growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely, swallowed by concrete and darkness and the kind of justice that never appeared in courtrooms. "It is finished," Rafael said quietly. Cassandra did not know yet that this moment would become a before and after in her life. That years from now, she would describe her existence in two parts, the time before Rafael found her on the highway, and everything that came after. But what she did not know, what none of them knew, was how this single choice would reshape everything. How his one act of trust in her, in front of his entire organization, would rewrite the rules that governed his entire world. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to understand how a maid and a blind mafia boss became bound to each other in ways neither of them could have imagined. 72 hours earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon that tasted like copper and desperation, Cassandra counted her money on the kitchen counter of her studio apartment in the Mission District. $17. 3 $5 bills and 2 ones. She had earned $28 from the night shift at the diner, had worked 12 hours on her feet serving coffee and eggs to men who looked through her like she was part of the furniture. One customer had left her a quarter. Another had complained that his toast was too dark and demanded that she remake it, and when she returned with a new plate, he had walked out without paying. The manager had made her cover the cost. $7.25. Gone. The rent notice sat on the kitchen counter next to the money. Eviction. $65,000. It was a number so large it had stopped making sense to her. 65,000. Her brain simply could not process it as something real. It was like being told she owed the moon. No, that was not accurate. If she owed the moon, at least everyone would acknowledge it was impossible. The landlord who owned 3 properties in San Francisco seemed to genuinely believe she could produce this number. He had given her 2 weeks. 14 days to either pay or vacate. After that, the police would arrive and put her things on the street, and that would be the end of her address, the end of her visible place in the world. Her hands shook as she counted the $17 again. 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 15. 17. It took her for seconds to count all of it. Less than a cup of coffee at the places where Rafael Castellano's men ate breakfast. She had never even spoken to Rafael Castellano. Not really. She had been working at his mansion for 8 years, ever since she was 19 years old and desperate enough to take a position that paid $8 an hour plus room and board. Room and board sounded generous until you realized the room was a converted storage closet off the kitchen and the board consisted of leftovers that nobody else wanted. But it had been better than living with Marcus Webb, and that was the metric by which she measured all things now. Better than Marcus Webb was the lowest possible bar, and even that was sometimes hard to clear. She had not seen Marcus in 3 years. He had disappeared after the last time, after the night she had finally called the police and they had actually come, and she had shown them the bruises and made a statement and believed, for exactly 1 hour, that something might change. Then the sergeant had called her and told her that Marcus had friends in the department, and that some of those friends had suggested that maybe she should be more careful about making accusations that might ruin a man's career. They could understand if she wanted to drop the charges. It would be easier for everyone that way. Especially for her. She had dropped the charges. Marcus had disappeared after that. She heard through people that he had moved to Los Angeles. Started some kind of import business. Made good money. She tried not to think about what import business meant, tried not to imagine the people who might work for him, tried to pretend that he existed in a different world entirely. And for 3 years, it had been almost possible to believe it. Now she had $17 and 2 weeks. The college acceptance letter sat in a drawer in her bedroom, folded and unfolded so many times that the creases had become weak, the paper beginning to separate along the lines. She took it out sometimes, usually when everything felt darkest, and read the words again. Congratulations. Merit scholarship. Full tuition. Beginning this fall. It had been written for months ago. She had never told the admissions office that she could not accept. She had simply let the deadline pass, had watched the opportunity expire like a candle burning down to nothing, and had told no one because there was no one to tell. The scholarship covered tuition, not living expenses. The $17 made clear what her position was on living expenses. She folded the acceptance letter very carefully and placed it back in the drawer beneath a stack of old uniforms. At that same hour, 3 miles away on the other side of the city, Rafael Castellano sat in his office and listened to Marco describe the quarterly earnings. The numbers were good. They were always good. His organization moved money through legitimate businesses, construction companies, restaurants, import firms, real estate. The illegitimate work that actually generated the enormous profits was conducted in languages no one else understood and documented in ways that did not exist. His accountants were very clever. His lawyers were cleverer still. His connection to the police department ensured that when federal agents occasionally got curious, they received phone calls from people with authority and retired to easier investigations. He sat at his desk with his hands folded and listened to Marco's voice, and he heard not the words but the hesitation that sat beneath them. Something was wrong. Not in the numbers. In something else. There is something more, Rafael said, interrupting. There is, Marco confirmed. His lieutenant was careful never to minimize the boss's perception. Rafael could not see the world through his eyes, but he could see through the micro-changes in voice, the places where breath caught, the rhythm of truth breaking apart into lies or omissions. Tell me. There has been interest from a rival family. The Morettis. They have been testing the perimeter, trying to understand our security apparatus. Who do they have on the inside? We do not know yet. Rafael stood and walked to the window that looked out over San Francisco. He could not see the city, had not been able to see it for 7 years, but he could feel it through the glass, the cool weight of the bay, the fog that moved like something alive, the distance and direction of the ocean. 7 years ago, his younger brother Dominic had wanted control of the organization. He had wanted it badly enough to betray Rafael, badly enough to arrange an explosion that was meant to kill him. It had failed. Rafael had survived. Dominic had not. The blindness was incidental. The loss of sight was almost meaningless compared to the loss of trust. Rafael had learned to operate in the dark because he had already been living in darkness long before his eyes stopped working. The only difference was that now everyone else knew it. Increase security, Rafael said. I want to know the name of the Moretti contact inside our organization within 48 hours. And Marco? When you find them, I want to understand why they were vulnerable. People become vulnerabilities when something is missing in their lives. I want to know what was missing. He turned away from the window. There is something else, Marco said carefully. One of the household staff mentioned that Victoria Ashford was at the society event last week. She asked about you. Specifically about whether you were involved with anyone. Rafael's jaw tightened slightly, barely perceptible. Victoria Ashford came from old money, the kind of wealth that had been in San Francisco for 4 generations. She had been raised to believe that the world belonged to her by birthright, that people were collections of resources to be obtained or discarded. She had decided at some point that Rafael was a resource worth obtaining. When he had declined, she had become dangerous in a different way. She had begun a campaign of social destruction designed to isolate him, to make his existence uncomfortable in rooms where money was spoken and power was currency. Her interest is not relevant, Rafael said. She spoke of your new maid. Asked who she was, where she came from. Asked whether you were keeping her. Rafael went very still. Not the stillness of anger, but the stillness of a predator that has caught a scent on the wind and become entirely focused. How did Victoria Ashford know about the new maid? She did not provide a name. But she seemed to know that someone new had entered the household recently. Someone young. Someone, Marco hesitated. Someone who interested you. I have a household staff of 22 people. Many of them are young. Yes, Marco said. But they both knew that Victoria Ashford, for all her cruelty and manipulation, was not a woman who asked questions about things that did not matter to her. If she had asked about the new maid, it meant something had caught her attention. It meant she saw a threat, or an opportunity, or something else that activated her instinct to destroy. Meanwhile, at exactly 6:43 in the evening, Cassandra stood in the kitchen of Rafael Castellano's mansion and prepared dinner for a man she had never directly spoken to. She had been working in this house for 8 years, had cleaned his rooms, done his laundry, organized his closets, and never once had he acknowledged her existence. He had paid her salary through an accountant. He had never asked her name. She was simply the maid, indistinguishable from the previous 3 maids he had employed and likely indistinguishable from the next 3 as well. Tonight she was making pasta from scratch because Mrs. Chen, who normally prepared his meals, had taken ill. The kitchen was enormous, all stainless steel and marble countertops, with equipment that cost more than every paycheck Cassandra had ever received combined. She felt small in here. She felt small everywhere, but especially in this kitchen, surrounded by evidence of a world she would never inhabit. The rain had started an hour ago. Heavy rain, the kind that came in November and stayed for days. She could hear it against the kitchen windows, loud and insistent, like something trying to break in. She did not know yet that Rafael Castellano was about to leave the office, that he would drive through this rain and take the same highway she would take later when her car broke down. She did not know that chance was about to collapse into inevitability. She did not know that in less than 12 hours, her life would split into before and after, and nothing would ever be the same again. She shaped the pasta dough with her calloused hands and thought about the $17 and the 2 weeks and the acceptance letter folded in her drawer. She thought about how the rain sounded outside, how it sounded like the world was washing away, and she wondered what would be left when the water finally stopped. What changed everything was a sound none of them expected. The 6 o'clock alarm on Cassandra Rivera's phone vibrated against the concrete floor of her basement room. Not a sound, a vibration. She had learned years ago to silence everything. Sound draws attention. Attention draws questions. Questions invite answers she could not afford to give. She opened her eyes to darkness. The basement room had no windows, no natural light, no way to know if the sun had risen except by the clock face glowing green in the shadows. 6 in the morning. Same as yesterday. Same as the day before that. Same as it had been for 8 years. The bed was narrow, a twin frame that had belonged to someone else before her. The sheets were clean because she washed them herself on Sunday nights when the mansion emptied and she could move through the halls without becoming invisible, because invisibility required effort when someone was watching. The blanket was thin. November rain hammered against the small basement window set high in the wall, and cold seeped through the concrete like a blade wrapped in ice. She sat up slowly. Her back protested. It always protested. Cassandra pulled her shirt over her head and turned to the cracked mirror hanging on the wall. The scars ran in every direction like a map of a place she had tried to escape. Some were thin and precise, made by careful hands. Others were jagged, made by rage. Some had faded to white. Others still carried the faint purple memory of recent violence. She touched one that curved along her shoulder blade, the one from 14 months ago, and whispered the words that kept her breathing. Just survive. Just one more day. She dressed in the black and white uniform hanging on the back of the door. The uniform made her disappear. That was the point. Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, had explained this 2 years ago while Cassandra was scrubbing the kitchen tiles on her hands and knees. You are paid to clean, not to be seen, Mrs. Chen had said, her voice sharp as a knife. The Castellano family does not notice maids. They do not want to notice maids. Your job is to exist in the spaces between their eyes. Do you understand? Cassandra had nodded. Yes. Good. Then you will last. The uniform fit perfectly. Black dress with a white apron. White collar, white cuffs. The fabric was cheap polyester that didn't wrinkle, didn't hold her body heat, didn't hold anything except the illusion that she was part of the house's infrastructure, like the pipes and wiring, functional and invisible. She braided her dark hair into a tight knot at the base of her skull. No loose strands. Nothing that could be noticed. In the pocket of her apron, she had placed $17. $17 was all that remained from her last paycheck. $2,000 had gone to the lawyer who told her there was nothing he could do about the debt. Marcus Webb had shown the documents to enough people, forged signatures, falsified contracts, that the debt had taken on a life of its own, independent of truth. $1,800 had gone to cover the shortfall on rent for a month. The remaining $17 sat in her pocket like a stone. She had 2 weeks. 2 weeks to find $265, or the landlord would lock her out of the apartment she kept in the city, the apartment that existed in a different world from this basement. 2 weeks to find $65,000 total, according to the notice that had arrived 3 days ago. The number was impossible. She had stopped trying to understand it. The acceptance letter was still in her drawer, folded so many times the creases had become tears. San Francisco State University. Full scholarship. She had opened it at 4 in the morning 3 years ago and read it 7 times to make sure the words didn't change. Environmental science. A degree that meant something. A future that meant something. She had filled out the deferment paperwork and kept deferring, kept pushing it forward like a debt she could somehow pay off if she just saved enough, worked enough, disappeared enough. Upstairs in the mansion, the day was already beginning. She could hear it through the thin pipes, the shower running in one of the guest bathrooms, the kitchen refrigerator opening and closing, Mrs. Chen's footsteps moving with purpose across the marble floor. Cassandra climbed the narrow basement stairs and entered through the service entrance into a world that existed in the corners and shadows of other people's lives. The mansion was enormous. Rafael Castellano had purchased it 12 years ago, though Cassandra had only been working here for 8. 37 rooms. She knew this because she had cleaned all of them at least 2,000 times. The hallways were lined with paintings that probably cost more than her life. She never looked directly at them. That seemed disrespectful somehow, to really see something that valuable, to let your eyes rest on it like you had any right. She began in the study on the 2nd floor. This room she cleaned 2,847 times. She knew the exact number because she had started counting years ago to keep her mind occupied while her hands worked. The study had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a desk made of mahogany that had come from somewhere important, and a leather chair that smelled like expensive cigars and the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. A single photograph sat on the corner of the desk, a man and woman, both young, both smiling. She had never asked who they were. Cassandra ran her dust cloth over the surfaces with careful precision. The kind of cleaning that left no evidence of having been cleaned. She never moved anything. She never opened anything. She simply made the room itself disappear back into perfection, the way it should exist, untouched by hands. The rain continued outside the windows, relentless and cold. November rain that sounded like something trying to break in. She did not know that Rafael Castellano was in a conference room downtown, that he was conducting business that involved men in suits and discussions of territories and shipments and the careful balance of power that held San Francisco together. She did not know that he would leave the office early because of the rain. She did not know that he would drive the same highway she would drive later, that he would be on that empty stretch of road when her car finally gave up trying to climb the hill toward home. She moved through the mansion like a ghost. Room to room. Bathroom to bedroom to hallway to study to library. Each room received her attention in sequence, the way a priest might move through a church, blessing each space with dust cloth and careful hands. By noon, her back ached. By 3 o'clock, her feet had stopped sending pain signals to her brain, she had learned to stop listening to them. By 5 o'clock, she was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Chen prepare the evening meal. Mrs. Chen had taken ill that afternoon. Not seriously, but seriously enough that she had retired to her small room on the 1st floor and asked Cassandra to prepare dinner. Rafael Castellano was dining at home tonight. He ate at home perhaps once a week. Most nights he dined elsewhere, in restaurants and clubs and private rooms where Cassandra would never go. The kitchen was enormous. All stainless steel and marble countertops, with equipment that cost more than every paycheck Cassandra had ever received combined. A pasta maker that could have fed 10 families hung on the wall, unused. The refrigerator was the size of a small room. Everything here was excessive and cold and calculated to remind anyone who entered that they existed in a space designed for wealth. She pulled out flour and eggs. She had made pasta once before, 3 years ago, from scratch with her mother's recipe before her mother had died and before Marcus had found her and before everything had broken into pieces she couldn't put back together. Her hands remembered the motion. Flour on the marble. A well in the center. Eggs cracked into the well. Fork stirred gently, and then hands took over, mixing the egg into the flour, creating dough that gradually became smooth and alive. The rain outside the kitchen windows was loud and insistent. Like something trying to break in. Like something that would not be stopped by glass. She shaped the pasta dough with her calloused hands and thought about the $17. She thought about the acceptance letter folded in her drawer. She thought about how the rain sounded outside, how it sounded like the world was washing away, and she wondered what would be left when the water finally stopped. Downstairs in the basement, her phone would sit silent all night. No one called her. No one texted her. The only person who ever contacted her was Marcus, and those messages came at unpredictable intervals, a debt notice, a threat, a reminder that she could not escape the terms he had created. But tonight, her phone remained silent. She did not know that in less than 14 hours, her car would break down on the highway. She did not know that Rafael Castellano would be driving past in his black SUV with his 2 lieutenants, Marco and Franco, flanking him in the darkness. She did not know that seeing her shivering on the side of the road in her thin jacket would cause something to shift in a man who had not shifted in 15 years. She did not know that chance was about to collapse into inevitability. The pasta dough was ready. She wrapped it in plastic and placed it in the refrigerator to rest. Tomorrow it would become something beautiful, something that might be noticed, something that might briefly draw Rafael Castellano's eye before he forgot it had ever existed. But tonight, as the rain fell harder and the November darkness wrapped around the mansion like a curse, something else was moving toward her through the wet streets and the fog rolling in from the bay. Something that would not let her remain invisible anymore. What changed everything was a sound she would never forget. The November rain fell like needles against the windshield, and Cassandra Rivera's hands trembled on the steering wheel of her 15-year-old Honda Civic as the engine began to smoke. Not now. Not tonight. The car lurched, coughed, and died on Highway 101 with a final metallic groan that echoed her own desperation. She pulled onto the shoulder, killed the ignition, and sat in the sudden silence, listening to the rain hammer the roof like it was trying to break through to her bones. The temperature outside was dropping. Inside the car, her breath came in visible clouds. She reached for her phone with shaking fingers. 3 a.m. on a Thursday night, and she had exactly $17 in her bank account. 17. Not 70. Not 100. $17 stood between her and complete nothing, and it had to last until next Wednesday when she collected her tips from the diner. If the tips came. If people were generous. If the world remembered she existed. The first mechanic's number went to voicemail. Closed. The second one too. The third picked up after 8 rings, and a man's voice, thick with sleep and irritation, told her what she already knew: nothing I can do at 3 in the morning. You looking at a tow, maybe $500 minimum. You got that kind of money? She hung up without answering. Outside, cars passed in sprays of water, their headlights turning the rain into sheets of liquid light. She had no umbrella, the one she owned had turned inside out in the wind 2 blocks from her basement apartment, and she couldn't afford another. Her jacket was thin cotton, something donated by Mrs. Chen at the diner because the one she owned had a hole in the shoulder she'd been patching with duct tape for 6 months. The rain was already finding its way through. Cassandra pulled her knees to her chest and tried not to think about pneumonia. Tried not to think about what would happen if she got sick and couldn't work. Tried not to think about Marcus, about the way his voice sounded when he called at 2 in the morning, when he reminded her that she owed him $65,000 and he had given her 2 weeks to find it. 2 weeks. That number lived in her chest like a stone. She didn't know how long she'd been sitting there when the headlights appeared behind her. 3 sets of them, closing in together like a coordinated strike. 3 black SUVs slowed, their engines cutting through the sound of the rain. She froze. Nobody stopped for people on the shoulder at 3 in the morning unless they wanted something. The first SUV door opened and a man emerged, broad-shouldered, dark suit immaculate despite the weather, a gun visible in a shoulder holster under his jacket. Marco DeLuca, though she didn't know his name then. She only knew the way his hand rested on his weapon, the way his eyes assessed her like she might be dangerous. He approached the driver's window, and she rolled it down 3 inches, terrified. Car trouble. His voice was sharp, suspicious. Yes. I'm sorry. I'm not. I'm just trying to get help. The second SUV door opened. Another man, similar build, similar suit, similar lethal calm. Franco Marcini. He moved to the back of her car, checking the engine like he understood what he was looking at, then gave a small shake of his head. Then the third SUV. The back door opened, and a man stepped out into the rain without an umbrella, without seeming to notice the cold, without looking at anything at all because Rafael Castellano had not looked at anything for the past 15 years. His eyes were obscured behind rain-speckled sunglasses even at 3 in the morning. His dark hair, silvered at the temples, was swept back from a face that had been carved from something harder than stone. His suit was black silk over a white shirt, and his overcoat was cashmere worth more than her entire year of wages, draped across his shoulders like it was nothing at all. He moved with absolute certainty toward her car, each step deliberate, measured, impossible from a blind man. But Rafael Castellano had learned to navigate the world through sound and the shape of space. He could hear the trembling in a person's breathing from 10 feet away. "Who is there?" His voice was deep, smooth as oil, as indifferent as death. Cassandra opened her mouth. Nothing came out. This was the man whose mansion she cleaned 6 days a week. The man whose study she entered at 5 a.m. when he was sleeping, whose desk she dusted without reading the papers on it, whose life she had existed beside for 8 years without ever being acknowledged as human. Rafael Castellano, who everyone in the city knew, who controlled everything from the docks to the casinos to the private clubs where men whispered numbers that represented other people's entire lives. Sir. Mr. Castellano. I'm sorry. My car broke down. I was just... He stopped. Something shifted in his expression. His head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something beneath her words. I know that voice. You clean my study. The rain fell harder. She nodded, realized he couldn't see the nod, and forced sound out. Yes, sir. 8 years, sir. I didn't know you would be driving past. I'm sorry. Raphael stepped closer. Up close, she could see the scars that ran from his left eye down to his cheekbone, thin white lines that spoke of violence survived. His blind eyes, milky behind the sunglasses, somehow saw more than she wanted them to. How long have you been standing in that rain? Maybe an hour, sir. His jaw tightened. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest, though she couldn't have known it. Couldn't have understood that Rafael Castellano, a man who had not felt protective of anyone since his brother's betrayal, was feeling it now, watching a woman who had worked in his house for 8 years stand alone on the side of a highway at 3 in the morning with $17 in her bank account and a hole in her future. Get her in the car. Now. His voice cut like a blade through the rain. Marco hesitated. Boss, we don't. Now. They didn't question him again. Within seconds, Cassandra was wrapped in the warm leather interior of the back SUV, sitting across from Rafael Castellano while her wet clothes dripped onto the expensive upholstery. She tried to make herself smaller, tried not to exist at all, tried to disappear the way she had learned to disappear 8 years ago. Rafael pulled off his sunglasses. His blind eye stared forward, unseeing but somehow not looking away. What is your name? Cassandra Rivera, sir. Cassandra. He tested the word like it mattered. Why were you driving a car that should have died 5 years ago? Her hand shook. It's all I can afford, sir. On a maid salary. His voice was genuinely confused. I pay well. She said nothing. In the front seat, she could feel Marco and Franco exchanging looks, could sense the tension that had entered the vehicle like something alive. Someone is taking your money, Rafael said. It was not a question. The rain drummed against the windows. She could hear her own breathing, too fast, too loud. You do not have to answer me tonight, he continued. But you will not return to that basement room. Marco will move your belongings to the guest wing. You are under my protection now. Protection. The word didn't make sense. People did not protect her. People used her, took from her, told her she was worthless and proved it with their hands. She stared at this blind man who somehow saw her clearly, and something in her chest cracked open. Why? Her voice was barely a whisper. Why would you help me? I'm nobody. Just a. You are the only person who has walked through my house in 8 years without wanting something from me. His voice was quiet, final. That is not nobody. The car pulled away from the highway, away from the rain and the broken car and the life she had been living in the margins. In the front seat, Marco's hands gripped the wheel tight, and Franco stared out at the darkness. Neither of them had ever seen Rafael like this. Ahead of them, the lights of San Francisco glowed against the black sky, beautiful and merciless, and Cassandra Rivera didn't know that everything was about to change. She didn't know that within 3 days, Marcus Webb would appear at the gate screaming her name and demanding money she didn't have. She didn't know that Victoria Ashford, Rafael's rival for power and affection, would see her as a threat and decide to destroy her. She didn't know that the torn college acceptance letter Rafael had found in her jacket pocket would become the key to everything. All she knew, in that moment, was that she was warm. And she was safe. And for the first time in 8 years, someone was choosing her instead of using her. The rain fell harder on the city, washing the streets clean of the day, and somewhere in the darkness, fate was beginning to close in. 1 week later, at 2 in the morning, the sound of gravel crunching beneath tires woke the entire household. Marcus Webb's truck crashed through the gate, not through any sophisticated security breach, but through pure, drunken rage. He slammed on the brakes 30 yards from the mansion's entrance and stumbled out into the November rain, his body a collection of poor decisions and burning fury. Cassie! Cassandra! His voice split the darkness like a blade through silk. I know you're in there. Come out here. The guards moved toward him, but he was already screaming louder, his words slurring together. You think some blind mafia boss scares me? You think you're safe in there? He grabbed a rock from the garden bed, wet, heavy, cold, and hurled it at the mansion's east wing window. The glass shattered with a sound like ice breaking on a frozen lake. I own you, Cassie. You belong to me. I'll burn this whole place down if you don't come out. 3 more guards emerged from the shadows. Marcus threw another rock, then another, his movements becoming more frantic, more desperate. The rain poured down his face, mixing with sweat and something darker, blood from where his fist had connected with the truck's interior moments before. She's mine, he screamed. She's always been mine. Marco appeared from the north entrance, moving with the deliberate grace of a man who had handled worse than this. He didn't run. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked toward Marcus with Franco at his side, and something in their stillness, that absolute absence of panic, seemed to terrify Marcus Webb more than any threat. Marco grabbed him by the collar. Not with violence, but with certainty. You're leaving. No. Cassie. Baby, tell him. Tell him you want to come with me. They dragged him backward, his feet scraping against gravel, his voice raw and breaking. I love you. I love you. Don't let him take me. Cassie, please. From her room on the 3rd floor, Cassandra heard every word. Every syllable found her like a physical blow. She stood at her window, watching the scene unfold below, the black rain, the struggling figure of the man who had defined her suffering for 8 years, the guards moving him away like he was nothing. Her breathing came in short, sharp gasps. Her hands shook as she gripped the window frame. The panic attack arrived without warning, her chest tightening as if wrapped in barbed wire, her vision narrowing to a tunnel, her mind spinning with the terrible thought, he knows where I am. He'll come back. This will never end. She sank to the floor, her back against the wall, pulling her knees to her chest. The rain continued outside. The guard's footsteps faded. But inside her chest, Marcus Webb's screams continued echoing. 3 days later, Victoria Ashford stood in the bathroom of the St. Francis Hotel, watching Cassandra in the mirror with the predatory patience of a woman who had spent 47 years perfecting the art of social destruction. 2 other women stood beside her, women whose names meant nothing to Cassandra, women whose clothing cost more than her entire year's salary. They had cornered her in here deliberately, cut her off from the ballroom where Rafael was meeting with city officials. "You're nervous," Victoria observed, stepping closer. Her perfume was suffocating, jasmine and something chemical, something that smelled like money. "I can always tell when someone doesn't belong. There's a tremor. A smallness." She smiled, and her teeth were very white. "Tell me, Cassandra, what do you actually believe is happening here?" Cassandra's hands went cold. "I don't. Do you actually think Rafael cares about you?" Victoria's voice was soft, almost conversational. "You're a project. A pity case. He saves broken things. It's what men like him do. The moment he's bored, you'll be back scrubbing toilets, and he'll have moved on to the next wounded creature that catches his attention." The other woman laughed, a bright, cruel sound that bounced off the marble walls. "I heard she's sleeping with him for protection. Oldest trick in the book. Trade your body for security. How very practical." "That's not true," Cassandra whispered, but the words had no strength. Victoria stepped closer, her heels clicking against tile. "Honey, men like Rafael Castellano don't fall for broken little birds. They use them. They prove they're capable of mercy by saving someone. Then they throw them away when the entertainment value diminishes." She reached out and touched Cassandra's chin, tilting her face upward. "You're nothing but a temporary entertainment until someone better comes along. Someone who isn't damaged. Someone worth keeping." Cassandra pulled away and ran from the bathroom, through the ballroom's edge, down the hallway, and out into the cold San Francisco afternoon. She didn't stop running until she reached the street, until the sounds of the charity event faded behind her, until she was alone on a sidewalk with strangers moving past her like she was invisible. That night, Cassandra stood on the mansion's east balcony in the cold November rain. The water soaked through her clothes, ice-cold drops running down her face, mixing with tears that would not stop coming. Her hands gripped the iron railing, knuckles white with pressure. The rain hammered down relentlessly, neon lights from the city reflecting off wet stone, turning everything below into a landscape of reds and blues and golds. She looked down at the dark garden, at the fall that would end everything, at the silence that waited below. Maybe Victoria was right. The thought came like a blade, sharp and certain. Maybe I'm just fooling myself. Rafael doesn't need the burden of my broken pieces. He has an empire to run. Marcus will never stop hunting. The police will never help. I've already cost him a fortune in security, time, attention. I'm poison to everyone who gets close." Her fingers loosened on the railing. The rain poured harder, and for a moment, just a moment, the weight of letting go seemed lighter than the weight of continuing. One small movement. One release. The end of the problem she had become. But then, through the rain-streaked glass door, she saw it. The torn college acceptance letter, framed in simple blackwood, sitting on her dresser where Rafael had placed it 3 days ago. The letter from UC Berkeley, dated 8 years prior, bearing her name, Cassandra Marie Rivera, and the words "Congratulations, you have been accepted." She had been meant for more than survival. Once, someone had believed that. A university had said so in writing. She had been 18 years old and full of possibility, and then Marcus had arrived and erased all of it with his hands. Her fingers tightened on the railing. She stepped back from the edge. The next morning, the underground poker room was filled with cigar smoke so thick it seemed solid. Green felt tables sat empty. Armed guards lined every wall. Rafael Castellano sat at the head of the largest table with Marco and Franco at either shoulder, his unseeing eyes pointed toward the men gathered before him. Sal Moretti was among them, a scarred man in his 60s, whose family had controlled gambling operations across California for 30 years. Around the table sat Rafael's own captains, his lieutenants, the men who had built his empire brick by brick, body by body. "I have a problem," Rafael said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "A man named Marcus Webb has violated the sanctuary of my household. He has abused a woman under my protection for 8 years. He has connections with corrupt police officers that make legal justice impossible. He has returned twice, despite warning. He is an infection that antibiotics cannot cure." He paused, and the silence became absolute. "I am offering him to the Moretti family as a gesture of goodwill. I understand you have been searching for a volunteer to test your new interrogation methods. Marcus Webb is, by all accounts, ideal for that purpose. He is disposable. He is guilty. And I trust that you will be thorough." Sal Moretti smiled slowly, a predator recognizing another predator. "We accept your generosity, Rafael. He will be educational." That night, 12 men in black moved through the city like ghosts. They moved through the rain, through the empty streets of the Mission District, up the stairs of Marcus Webb's apartment building without a single word spoken between them. The door breach took 3 seconds. A battering ram, a splinter of wood, a kick that sent the door frame inward. Marcus was dragged from his bed, yanked from sleep into a nightmare he could not wake from. He was pulled into the hallway, down the stairs, toward a black van that waited at the curb with its engine running. "What are you doing?" "What did I do?" "Who are you?" Nobody answered. Nobody spoke. They simply moved with absolute precision, trained and purposeful, treating him like cargo rather than a human being. In the underground poker room, Marcus Webb was thrown onto the floor like a piece of garbage. He landed hard, his body hitting tile, the wind knocked from his lungs. He looked up at Rafael's face, at those blind eyes that saw him more clearly than any eyes he had ever known, and felt something inside him shatter. "Please," he gasped. "Please, I didn't mean. Cassie and I were just, we have history, please." "You had 8 years to show mercy," Rafael said quietly. "You showed fists instead. You had the opportunity to let her go. You hunted her down. You called corrupt cops instead of letting her escape." He gestured to Sal Moretti with one hand. "He is yours. Make it last." Marcus Webb began to scream. His screams were animal sounds, the screams of a man watching his own ending approach. Sal Moretti's men dragged him away as Rafael returned to his chair, cigar smoke curling around his face like a benediction. Marcus Webb was never seen in San Francisco again. The streets whispered about what had happened to him, but nobody knew for certain. Death would have been too quick, too easy, too merciful. What Sal Moretti offered was something far worse, something that lasted. 2 days later, federal agents in tactical gear and assault rifles surrounded Victoria Ashford's estate at dawn. The gates were breached. Doors were kicked in. Warrant in hand, the lead agent climbed the marble stairs to Victoria's bedroom and found her still asleep, silk sheets twisted around her expensive body. The arrest was methodical and public. Victoria was dragged from her bed in champagne-colored silk pajamas, screaming obscenities that echoed through her mansion like a soundtrack to her own destruction. "Do you know who I am?" she shrieked as they read her rights. "My lawyers will destroy you. My family will." "Victoria Ashford," the agent said, his voice flat and professional, "you are under arrest for tax evasion, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Your family's charitable foundation has been funneling money to offshore accounts for the past 15 years. We have documentation for every transaction. 15 years, Miss Ashford. $400 million. Her face went the color of ash. Within hours, the story had exploded across every media outlet in California. Her mugshot was everywhere: wild hair, smeared makeup, the expression of someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. Her accounts were frozen. Her social circle abandoned her like she was contagious. Women who had lunched with her for decades suddenly had no memory of her name. The headlines were merciless: San Francisco society icon arrested in massive fraud. $40 million charitable scam. The fall of the Ashford dynasty. Federal prison. 40 years minimum. Total financial ruin. Her children fled the state. Her husband filed for divorce. Everything she had built, the social status, the charity boards, the influence, was revealed to be built on theft and corruption. The rain continued to fall on San Francisco, washing the streets clean. For months had passed since the rain stopped falling on San Francisco. The city that had seemed so dark, so suffocating, had transformed into something almost bearable. Cassandra Rivera stood in the study of Rafael Castellano's mansion, holding a college acceptance letter that had been taped together with the kind of care that suggested someone had spent hours making it whole again. The letter trembled in her hands. She had not known he kept it. All these months, while she moved through his world like a ghost learning to breathe again, the torn pieces of her future had been sitting in a frame on his mahogany desk, waiting for the moment when she would be ready to see it. "I found this the night I brought you home," Rafael said. His voice came from the leather chair near the window, deep and solid like an oath. He did not turn to face her, but his hand moved across the desk with deliberate slowness, as if movement itself required negotiation with a body that carried old wounds. "Torn in half. Thrown away in the darkness of your car. I kept it because I knew the woman who earned this letter was still inside you, waiting to be found." Cassandra could not speak. The words caught in her throat like they always did when he said things that rewrote the history of her own suffering. She had started taking online courses 6 weeks ago. Introduction to Psychology. Basic English Composition. Statistics for Social Sciences. Each assignment felt like reclaiming something that Marcus Webb had stolen when he broke her ribs and told her she would never amount to anything. Each grade felt like proof that he had lied. Rafael arranged tutors without asking permission. A woman named Dr. Elena who came twice a week and sat across from Cassandra at the kitchen table, walking through research methodologies and citation formats with the patience of someone who understood that learning required trust. When Cassandra stumbled over a concept, Dr. Elena did not sigh or simplify. She explained it again, differently, until something clicked into place. "He never asks for thanks," Dr. Elena told her after the third session, watching Rafael move through the kitchen with Marco and Franco, discussing something about shipping routes and diplomatic arrangements. "In 15 years, I have worked for men like him. They take what they want and they expect gratitude in return. But he does not take from you." Cassandra had smiled then, small and careful, the way she had learned to smile since the night her car broke down on a highway during a November downpour. The college paper came back marked with a red A at the top. 97%. Excellent analysis. Sophisticated argument structure. Room for deeper exploration of secondary sources, but remarkable first effort. She ran through the mansion like she used to run as a child, before her childhood ended. Rafael was in his study, reviewing documents that probably involved things she did not want to understand. When she burst through the door, breathless and alive, something shifted in his face, a crack in the fortress of control that only appeared when she was near. "Listen to this," she said, not waiting for permission, reading her thesis statement aloud. Her voice shook. "The trauma response is not a sign of weakness, it is evidence of survival. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget, and that remembering is not pathology. It is wisdom." He listened to every word. When she finished, he set down his pen and removed his reading glasses, dark eyes holding hers with the intensity of someone seeing something precious revealed. I am proud of you, he said. Cassandra stopped breathing. No one has ever said that to me before, she whispered. His hand found hers across the desk. The touch was gentle, requesting nothing, offering everything. Then I will say it often until you believe it. The trial concluded on a Tuesday. Victoria Ashford stood in federal court in a grey prison jumpsuit, all the champagne-coloured silk stripped away, all the social armour revealed as illusion. Guilty on all counts. 40 years minimum. Assets seized. Foundation dissolved. The judge's gavel fell like a door closing on an entire world. The news played on the television in the study that evening. Cassandra watched footage of Victoria being led away, no longer screaming, just hollow. Empty. The woman who had made it her project to destroy Cassandra's remaining dignity had been crushed by the weight of her own corruption. I thought I would feel happy, Cassandra said, her voice barely audible. But I just feel empty. Rafael was quiet for a long moment. The sound of the city filtered through the windows, car horns, distant sirens, the endless noise of people going about lives that did not involve federal crimes or trauma or the systematic erasure of another human being. Justice is not about happiness, he said finally. It is about safety. You are safe now. That is what matters. One evening on the balcony, overlooking the city lights that stretched like diamonds scattered across black velvet, Cassandra finally asked the question that had lived in her chest since the moment his black SUV appeared on a dark highway. Why did you save me that night? The wind moved through San Francisco, carrying the smell of rain and distant ocean. Rafael did not answer immediately. His silence was not cold, it was the silence of someone choosing words with the precision of a surgeon selecting instruments. Because I heard in your voice what I have felt since my brother's betrayal, he said. That moment when you realize trust is the most dangerous gift you can give. The understanding that to trust again after that kind of wound requires a kind of courage that most people will never possess. He turned slightly, his scarred face catching the city lights. I decided that if one person in this world deserved to learn trust again, it should be you. And I wanted to be worthy of being that person. She turned to him fully. The city spun beneath them. The lights blurred. You handed Marcus to the Moretti family, she said. Not a question. A statement of what she had pieced together from conversations she was not supposed to hear, from the sudden cessation of threats, from the way Marco and Franco exchanged looks when she entered rooms. Yes. Because of me. Because of you. Her breath caught. The air between them changed texture, became something that required negotiation. Rafael, I do not know how to repay. He moved his hand slightly, cutting off the words with a gentleness that was sharper than any cruelty could have been. I do not want repayment, he said. I want you to stand as my equal. To rebuild your life not in my shadow, but in your own light. And when you are whole again, if you choose to stand beside me, I want it to be because you want to, not because you owe me. The wind picked up. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled like a reminder that storms always move toward the horizon eventually. 6 months after that evening, Cassandra graduated with honors from her first year of college. The ceremony hall was packed with families celebrating. She saw Rafael in the third row, Marco and Franco flanking him like sentries, all 3 men in dark suits that cost more than she used to make in a month. When her name was called, Cassandra Rivera, Associate of Arts, Psychology, summa cum laude, Rafael stood before anyone else did and began to applaud. She saw him from the stage. His blind eyes could not see her, but his hands recognized the moment anyway, as if some part of him had always known exactly where she was. That evening, in his study, Rafael held the frame-torn college acceptance letter. The frame was mahogany and expensive, the letter behind glass, the tape that held it together visible and honest. I kept this because I knew that the woman who earned this letter was still inside you, waiting to be free, he said. You are not my maid. You are not my project. You are not broken. She took the frame, and tears spilled down her face like rain after months of drought. Then what am I? She asked. He stepped closer, his hand finding her face with the practiced gentleness of someone who had learned to navigate darkness. His fingers traced her cheekbone, her jaw, as if reading the story written in her skin. "You are the only person in this world I trust," he said. "The only person who showed me that mercy and strength can exist in the same breath. The only person I want standing beside me, not behind me." She whispered, "I was so invisible for so long." "Not to me," he said. "Never to me." She kissed him then, finally allowing herself to believe in safety, in trust, in a future that did not include fear or counting money or waiting for the next blow to fall. His hands found her back, held her like she was something precious and real, something that mattered. 1 year later, Cassandra worked as a counselor for abuse survivors. Her office was quiet and safe, painted soft green like new growth. Rafael funded it quietly, through his foundation that bore her name, the Cassandra Rivera Center for Healing. Marcus Webb's name was never spoken again. He had simply ceased to exist, swallowed by the Moretti family's darker appetites. On a day when March sun turned rain to steam on the sidewalks, Cassandra and Rafael stood on the same balcony where she had once felt invisible. She leaned into him, her head against his shoulder. "After the rain, the sky clears," she said. He smiled, that rare smile that only appeared for her now. "And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places," he said. "This story is about finding someone who sees you when you have been invisible for too long. Someone who protects you without demanding anything in return. Someone who reminds you that you were always meant for more than survival." If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Comment below and tell me, what would you have done in Cassandra's position? What would you have chosen? Remember this, the person who truly loves you will never ask you to stay small. They will help you stand tall. Thank you for staying until the very end. We will see you again in the next video.